Hello and welcome to another episode of the Silk and Steel podcast. I'm your host, Carl Za. Today we have a very special guest, all the way from Russia. Um, T- Timo, welcome to our show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Which I was gonna introduce you, then I realized I don't even know which part of Russia. I know it's somewhere close on the border with Finland, but
That's right. That's right.
yeah, can I just say from the Karelia region? I don't know how much
Yeah,
info you want to give out.
yeah. I'm in Keralian now. It's my motherland. I've been here for almost 2 years, and I've been here almost 2 years, and it's mostly due to COVID the last year because I was supposed to be here for a while and then leave, and now I cannot leave. I mean, except for Finland, I cannot go anywhere else, and I'm not. I have to be here with my dad, basically.
We are in the same boat, except I chose to be in Bali. I don't plan to go anywhere. Now that I have a baby,
Yeah.
I
Oh yeah,
probably.
congrats, by the way.
Thank you,
Yeah, you
thank
have a
you.
son. Cool.
And we're also waiting for vaccination, but
Mm.
I don't think there's enough vaccines to go around right now in Indonesia, so we don't know when that's going to
Yeah.
happen. Actually, my father-in-law just went ahead and got his first dose. So at least somebody I know are getting the vaccine, so that's good. But today I brought you on the show to talk about two specific areas because um, I know you from Twitter, and I immediately recognize you offer a very unique perspective because you are, as you mentioned, you are born in former Soviet Union, now Russia, and then you come. You've been to both. You have lived in Hong Kong, and you also have been to Xinjiang, and you have many local connections. The reason I wanted to talk to you is because normally we usually hear a user from Chinese, the Chinese from Chinese mainland, or Western expats who had lived in China. Well, at least those are the crowds I have been inviting on my show. so like
I've noticed. I
yes.
was surprised when you invited me, but then I thought maybe you want a perspective of like what you said to me. You told me that it's about the ethnic minority from Russia, that kind of thing. It was just it's different from a Russian from Russia. That's true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, first of all, just coming from Russia, it's already that's a different perspective. So
Yeah. Okay.
then say somebody from U.S., UK, or Australia, but
Yeah, it's
you
very
as
different.
a ethnic minority. Is that called Keralian? Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. I'm not sure how it's called in English. Well, I know how it's called in our language and in Finnish and Karelian maybe. Yeah.
I like I only thing I know about Karelia is that it's very closely related to Finland, and Karelians and Finnish are kind of what would you say, like cousin?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a
Yeah.
cousin, yeah. But the Karelians are the east, so to speak, eastern cousins of Finns, and our history places us more into Russian civilization. That is for the Eastern Karelians. For the Western ones, they're like assimilated in Finland now. After they moved after the World War, like a Winter War, World War II, they call it continuation war. A lot of people moved to Finland. But we are like
Uh-huh.
we were in Russian history for more than 800, less than 800 years, somewhere there, because the Novgorod made us vassals 800 years ago.
So Eastern Karelia actually was part of Russia before, like, Peter the Great and all that.
The Karelia, the entire Karelia. Sorry for the gap. It's I'm also a first time on a podcast of any kind, so I apologize in advance, to interrupt you. But yeah, we were in Russian civilization, so to speak, for longer than 800 years.
The Keralian ethnic identity and language is still very much alive. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Young people switch to Russian. language.
Mm,
It's happening
yeah.
since the 1970s, especially since the late Soviet Union. It was a I would say it was an assimilation policy, like education mostly in Russian.
Is this because proliferation of television?
Yes, also that and the cultural influence, and but the policies as well.
Mm,
The early Soviet policy resulted in us having almost like a separate country, the Finnish Keralian
mm.
SSR. Then it was dismantled, made into like a autonomous SSR, and after that, I'm afraid I would call it a Russification. What was happening since the 1970s. That is basically I put a blame on that, but mostly late Soviet Union.
So basically, Karelia used to be. I mean, in the feudal times, it's even though it's part of the Russian Empire, it still maintained sort of
Yeah,
autonomy, right? That's what you're saying.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
got
yeah.
it. Yeah. So I invited you because I thought, coming from your background, you would have a very unique perspective. Especially you mentioned you have traveled to Xinjiang and had many local friends, and then you also lived in Hong Kong. How did that happen? How did you end up in Hong Kong?
I always wanted to come to Hong Kong, at least a brief period, because I'm growing up in the 90s in Russia. Yeah, I'm born in 1982, so I'm growing up in the 90s in Russia, and I was interested in Hong Kong movies very much. I mean, I tweeted a lot about that, as you know, and always wanted to come to Hong Kong, but I couldn't even dream about coming to Hong Kong, to be honest, during the 1990s. But it's like it was a very distant. The destination was out of reach. Then it's because I moved to Finland in middle that's 2007 or 2000, well, 2006, but 2007 when I moved permanently to Finland. Now I don't live there, but I've lived there for 10 years. And in Finland, I went to study in 2015, and then I was able to go on a kind of a student exchange, but not for university, but for like I did like an internship in.
So you actually about same age as me. I'm a little bit older. I was
Yeah,
born in
somewhat.
19. Yeah, I was
Mhm.
born in 1976. So I can understand your yearning for Hong Kong because growing up in 1980s China, that's when China first started to
Yeah,
open up and
yeah,
opening
yeah,
and reform period, and that's when all the Hong Kong movies and TV series suddenly
exactly.
start to make their appearance in mainland China. And for us, little kids in 1980s, Hong Kong is just like a magical wonderland.
Same,
It's
same, same. I mean, like a
yeah,
lot of the heroes from the movies I had were Hong Kong movies. It include cops and gangsters and the kung fu and all of that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, growing up in the 80s, like the most popular TV series back then were
Yeah.
Hong Kong produced martial arts
Well, you're lucky
epics.
because you're lucky because you could see the TV series. We couldn't get that. We would have movies on VHS and it would be like dubbed, or it would be voiceover translated on VHS.
I'm I'm thinking my younger audience probably don't even know what a VHS is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Man, that's I grew
yeah, so
up with the VCR as my best friend. I just watch all these. Included also Japanese and Hollywood and the European movies, but Hong Kong was this thing that I got obsessed with because of the movies. Yeah, the 1980s because I'm from the 1980s. I was interested in these 80s movies with the skyscrapers and all that, and it had a lot of charm back in the day.
and also 1980s was kind of the golden era of Hong Kong film industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's like the best Hong Kong movies were produced in the 80s and maybe early 90s. Like it has
Yeah,
since gone downhill because partly
that's for
because
sure.
a lot of the Hong Kong talent now they go to mainland China where there's more
Yeah,
money.
the best
And
director is still directing in China now. Yeah.
yep. And so maybe we can let's before we talk about Xinjiang, let's talk about Hong Kong a little bit. Because I got to
Okay.
know you initially on Twitter through like the Hong Kong protest, and I
Yeah.
saw your post on Hong Kong protest, and you talk about your times in Hong Kong and working with I believe like the domestic help from Southeast Asia,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
you talk about a lot of things, you really flesh out the context. So let's talk about, so how did you end up in like how did you finally uh, got to Hong Kong, and what were you doing there?
But I started traveling to Hong Kong before I went there for a short residence, right? I've been just traveling to Hong Kong a lot since we didn't have a Russian citizen, and I'm a Russian citizen. So we didn't have a, I think it's 2009 or 2011, we didn't have a visa anymore, the requirement for a visa. We could travel for 2 weeks, with just as a visitor. It's not 3 months like for Americans. I think it's 3 months for Americans. For
Mm,
me, it's 2 weeks. But I would make a lot of these
yeah.
2 weeks trips. Between 2013 and 2015, I'd make a lot of these trips. So that was the first time, and I started making friends through couch surfing first.
So for my American audience who does not maybe not familiar with Hong Kong, Hong Kong is actually governed as its own kind of separate territory, even though it returned to China after 1997. Like to for a mainland Chinese person, a PRC citizen from mainland China to go to Hong Kong, they still need to apply for permits.
That's
There's
right.
still a border. Yeah, there's still a border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, the next Chinese city over. And for yes, so in the 1980s, that's why when I was little kids, we dream about traveling to Hong Kong one day.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it was a different time. It was a different China, different Hong Kong.
different China, different Hong Kong. Back in 1980s, Hong Kong's GDP is like 25% of China
Yeah,
overall GDP, something crazy like that. Now it's like I think I thought the
one
statistic is like yeah 1%.
one point
So I
five
mean
percent, something
yeah,
like that.
China has grown like leaps and bounds in the last 40 years, and
Sure.
I think that's why I think a lot of people find it hard to make the adjustment, including some people in Hong Kong. And I think that's also one of the underlying reason for the protest. But let's talk about let's shift the focus back on you about your
No problem.
experience. So you went to so you traveled to Hong Kong before,
Yeah.
and then how did you get a gig to stay there? Like I understand you like lived there for a while, right?
So yeah, I went to study in Finland, in Helsinki, for social work, and they typically offer exchanges, but not only between universities, but you can do like an entire internship, including an entire year of internship in another country. One of the options was Hong Kong, and I took Hong Kong right away for my last year of studies. Eventually, I even spent like a longer time than usual students because I wanted to spend longer time in Hong Kong, do my thesis in Hong Kong, and that's what I did. I did a bachelor's degree thesis in Hong Kong. So that it took me an academic year plus a few more months on a separate visa to be like a research assistant. That's how it happened through university in Helsinki. That's a
Oh,
capital city in Finland. If people don't know
so
that.
was it easy? Thank you for pointing that out. I we
Yeah.
for my American audience, just assume that more information is always better.
Okay.
So
Helsinki
for
is the
was it
capital in Finland, and I've lived there for 10 years. And I went to study for social work in English, like an English language class. I mean, I speak Finnish, but not perfectly.
was it easy to travel? I mean, to apply for the visa and like a
Yeah,
study visa, I guess, in
yeah.
Hong Kong.
Sure. It's not a study visa. I had a training visa. It's a little bit
Mm,
different from studies. It's like an employment, but you're not allowed to get paid. So the university pays you a grant. I got a couple of grants from the European Union, and so that's how I got into Hong Kong. I couldn't work there, but literally I was doing a job for for
mm.
free, as many internships are,
Ah,
free job.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, the unpaid internships.
Yep.
What did you do exactly?
I went to the organization. And well, now I mentioned they didn't pay me, so I don't. I want to give them face somehow. Like they just can. They cannot pay. They're not rich organization, but it's an NGO that is backed by the um, man. Who's the main patron? I think it's Anglican Church that is patronizing this small NGO because
Mm.
their headquarters are in St. John's Cathedral. That's the oldest cathedral in Hong Kong. They are not religious organization, but they originally started from some sort of religious background. Because a lot of Filipinos are religious, and not only Catholic but also Protestant and stuff like that. So it started, I think, as a Filipino or a mission for Filipino migrants. That's I think how it was called, and then they renamed it Mission for Migrant Workers. So like all the migrants, Indonesians, Indian, or whoever. But it's focused on the female. How do, the real good term for it is migrant workers, but they call them um,
Domestic help.
domestic
Uh,
helpers. Yes,
yeah.
I would call them domestic
Um,
workers, but because helper is condescending and doesn't sound right. But they call them
yeah.
even legislation in Hong Kong calls them helpers. Yeah,
Yeah, actually, I think domestic worker probably is a better term. In
yeah,
fact, I was shocked by the Hong Kong term
yeah.
for the domestic workers because they straight up called the Filipinas who work in the work as domestic workers. They call them Fei Yong, right? Which
Mm,
is Filipino. Like Yong is I mean, people argue with me, but from a person from mainland, my understanding that the Chinese word for "yong" literally means servant,
yeah,
right? And that's for me it is kind of shocking that term is even used. But there's some
yeah.
people trying to argue with me semantically. It's like, oh, "yong," but also mean like "gu yong," like employee, like a
Yeah.
employee. I'm like, no, dude. Like, I know the context in which it was used. It was not used as
Okay.
oh the Filipino
Well,
employee.
they'll say
It
it's a
was
traditional word. They'll say it's a traditional word. Doesn't mean what it meant, but the terms still kind of have a gravity. Like for example, domestic helper. The helper part is what I disagree with. I would like to be called. I would like it to be called in the documents a domestic worker or migrant. Well, migrant worker is a more general term, but for a profession that they do, the housework. I mean, it's kind of a diverse housework that they do. Or how do you call it? I think that it should be called domestic worker because helper, and that's the position of every advocacy and NGO and whatever caseworker and whatever fund. Because helper sounds condescending and bad. It's quite close to servant. No, there's just helping. That's coming from
yeah.
Finland.
I mean,
It's also a shock because Finland has moved a lot from these condescending lord versus servant kind of stereotypes. It's actually considered very old fashioned and not good.
for so for people who are not familiar with the situation in Hong Kong, since Hong Kong economy took off and the development of a middle class, Hong Kong started to import these domestic workers primarily from Southeast Asia. Originally, it was from the Philippines. A lot of Philippine impoverished Filipina women, they came to Hong Kong and worked in the as domestic workers. Now I think there's more from Indonesia, right? So I think it's what, maybe fifty
Yeah,
fifty. Yeah.
almost 50-50, I think. There's also that I met the workers from India and from Sri Lanka too. Uh, but Philippines and Indonesia, it's a little bit from Malaysia, I think, but not much. But it's you have Indonesians and Philippines almost half to half. In fact, if you go, you know that the Sunday is the normal for like 95% of them. The day off is Sunday, and so they
Yeah.
fill the streets on Sunday. So if you go to Victoria Park in Hong Kong, it would be mostly Indonesian community. If you go to Central and nearby Admiralty, it'll be mostly Filipino community. So they kind of divide like that. But both places are filled with people. Both places, you can see how many Filipinos and how many Indonesian women.
I remember you said something that's interesting. You said, like, like their employers, the household in which these domestic workers work in, they're not, a lot of times they're not even necessarily like upper middle class or upper
Yeah.
class. Some of them even like, how do you describe it? Maybe because you work with them, you probably know the context better. This concludes the preview portion of my interview with Timppa, an ethnic Keralian from Russia who have lived in Hong Kong and visited Xinjiang. In the full interview, we discuss economic disparity and class in Hong Kong, as well as Timppa's experience in Xinjiang. For the access to the full episode, visit my Patreon page. Go to patreon.com, search Silk. The first result will be the Silk and Steel podcast. I hope you enjoy listening and I hope you subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.